The Great War. World War I. The war to end all wars. It began in the summer of 1914, sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo. But this single act of violence set off a chain reaction in a Europe already tense with alliances and rivalries. Within weeks, the continent, and soon the world, was engulfed by a war unlike any it had seen before. What began as a conflict between Austria-Hungary and Serbia quickly drew in Germany, Russia, France, Britain, and later many other nations. The war unfolded on multiple fronts: the trenches of Western Europe, the frozen Eastern Front, the Italian Alps, and deserts of the Middle East. Millions of soldiers and civilians alike would be drawn into the horror. At its heart were the battles, devastating clashes of men and machines that defined both the scale and the tragedy of World War I. Let's journey to the key battlegrounds and see how this war was fought. The year was 1914. After Germany launched its sweeping Schlieffen Plan to knock France out of the war quickly, their advance seemed unstoppable. Belgium was overrun, and German forces were within striking distance of Paris. It seemed as though they would claim a swift and decisive victory. But the Allies had other plans. From September 6 to September 12, the French and British armies launched a counter-offensive along the Marne River. The battle was frenetic. Massive armies clashed over muddy fields and villages. The French, desperate to stop the German advance, even requisitioned Parisian taxis to rush reinforcements to the front line. And then, a miracle. The Allies broke through German lines, forcing their retreat. Paris was saved. But it was not the end of the war. It was just the beginning. As the Germans fell back, they dug defensive trenches to hold their ground. The Allies did the same. By the time the battle ended, it marked the dawn of a grim and grueling phase of the war. Trench warfare. Far from the muddy trenches of Europe, another struggle was brewing in the Ottoman Empire. The Gallipoli campaign, fought on the Turkish peninsula of Gallipoli, was Britain and its allies' attempt to knock the Ottomans out of the war and secure a supply route to Russia. On April 25, 1915, Allied troops landed on beaches riddled with Ottoman defenders who occupied the high ground. Among the attackers were troops from Australia and New Zealand, the Anzacs, who would forever remember Gallipoli as a crucible of their national identities. The fighting was brutal. Soldiers endured searing heat by day, freezing cold by night, with little food or water. Week after week, the battle raged on, with the Allies making little progress against the heavily fortified Ottoman positions. By the time the campaign ended in January 1916, the Allies had suffered over 200,000 casualties and had achieved little. Gallipoli demonstrated the horrors of amphibious warfare and the importance of terrain in battle. The Battle of Verdun was unlike anything the world had ever seen. In February 1916, German forces launched an offensive designed to bleed France dry by attacking the symbolic fortress city of Verdun. Their logic was twisted but clear. Verdun was an icon of French pride, and the French would defend it at any cost. For 10 wearying months, the hills and forests around Verdun became a living nightmare. Artillery shells rained down day and night, turning once beautiful landscapes into a lunar wasteland of craters and corpses. Trenches, dugouts, and fortresses were contested in relentless attacks and counterattacks. Human lives were measured in meters, gained or lost. The battle became a deadly symbol of the war itself, unyielding, merciless, and senseless. By the time it ended in December, over 700,000 had died, and the front lines were virtually unchanged. While Verdun raged in the east, another titanic battle was unfolding to the north, the Battle of the Somme. Planned as a massive Allied offensive to relieve pressure on Verdun and break through German lines, the Somme would become infamous for its sheer scale of human loss. On July 1, 1916, British forces launched their attack. Soldiers emerged from their trenches, walking towards enemy lines under the assumption that their pre-battle bombardment had destroyed German defenses. But the defenses were intact, and the Germans were waiting. By the end of that first day, nearly 60,000 British soldiers had been killed or wounded, the bloodiest day in British military history. And yet, the battle continued. For 5 months, waves of men advanced over the same blood-soaked ground, only to be cut down by machine guns and artillery. The Somme became a stark reminder of the futility of World War I's battles, but it also introduced new horrors to the battlefield. Tanks made their grim debut in the mud and chaos of the Somme. When it finally ended in November 1916, over 1 million men were dead or wounded. The ground gained? A mere handful of miles. Far away on the Eastern Front, Russia aimed to break the German and Austro-Hungarian stranglehold with a daring plan, the Brusilov Offensive. Led by General Alexei Brusilov, the Russian army launched their attack in June 1916 against Austria-Hungary. What made Brusilov's tactics unique was his focus on preparation. His forces dug concealed trenches and tunnels to approach enemy lines undetected. Then, rather than a massive bombardment announcing the offensive, Brusilov employed short, sharp bursts of artillery fire to catch his enemies off guard. The results were staggering. Russian forces achieved one of the most significant breakthroughs of the war, destroying entire Austro-Hungarian armies and forcing Germany to divert troops from other fronts. But despite its success, the offensive drained Russian resources and morale. It ultimately played a key role in destabilizing the already crumbling Russian Empire, paving the way for the revolutions to come. By 1917, the Western Front had become a quagmire, both literally and figuratively. Few battles embodied this hopelessness more than the Battle of Passchendaele, also known as the Third Battle of Ypres. The offensive began in July 1917, with a British bid to break through German lines in Flanders, Belgium. But rainfall turned the battlefield into a vast swamp of clinging mud. Soldiers struggled not just against the enemy, but against nature itself. Men and horses alike drowned in the mire. The battle dragged on for months, with agonizingly little progress. By the time it ended in November, the Allies had captured the shattered remnants of the village of Passchendaele. The cost: nearly 600,000 casualties. Passchendaele came to symbolize the sheer futility of World War I. As the war entered its final year, a turning point finally came. The 100 Days Offensive, launched by the Allies in August 1918, was a series of coordinated attacks along the Western Front designed to break the stalemate once and for all. The offensive began with the Battle of Amiens, where Allied forces used combined arms tactics, including infantry, tanks, and air support, to punch through German defenses. From there, the offensive gained momentum as German forces, exhausted and outnumbered, began to collapse. City after city fell as the Allies pushed relentlessly forward. By November 1918, the German High Command had no choice but to seek an armistice. On November 11th, the guns fell silent. These battles, and countless others, defined World War I. They left scars on the land, shattered nations, and stole an entire generation's youth. By the time the war ended in 1918, over 16 million soldiers and civilians had died. But the story didn't end there. The Treaty of Versailles and the political tensions that followed would set the stage for an even greater conflict 20 years later. World War I was a war of firsts. The first global war. The first to feature tanks, airplanes, and chemical weapons. But it was also a war of paradoxes, of courage amidst carnage, of technological progress amidst unimaginable suffering. It changed our world forever, a grim testament to the cost of unchecked ambition and the fragile balance of peace.